Mark, ready?
So we are here at Hof University. My name is Claus Atzenbeck. I'm professor at this university, and I'm also general co-chair of the ACM Hypertext Conference 2019. I'm mentioning this because we are trying to reach out to different communities which are related to hypertext research. And one community certainly is interactive fiction. So I'm very pleased that we have this event tonight at Hof University, where the Hypertext Conference 2019 will take place. So first of all, I would like to welcome special people. One is Dene Grigar. She is reading this hypertext piece. Dene is professor at Washington State University in Vancouver, USA, and she is also president of the Electronic Literature Organization. Dene also accepted a position or a task at ACM Hypertext 2019. She is the curator of the exhibition we want to implement for the conference. I also would like to pass a warm welcome to Mark Bernstein, who is joining us remotely. Mark is the author of this piece. It's called Those Trojan Girls. Mark is also chief scientist at IISYS. And Mark is the creative track chair at Hypertext 2019. So Mark, a special warm welcome to you. Nice to have you around us. Also thanks to John Barber, who for your valuable comments over the past few days, and a special thanks to Daniel Rosner, my PhD student, who did all the designing of the different bits and pieces, technical equipment, and also conducting all that right now so that we have a live stream on YouTube. Last but to thank the audience in this room, so thanks for coming, as well as the audience in front of the computer screen watching us on YouTube. Please do not hesitate to raise questions to either Dene or Mark. You can do this in this room by raising your hand, and you can do this using YouTube's comment function. So we are very keen on your questions and your comments on this piece. So I wish you all a pleasant performance. Thanks again to you, Dene, and you, Mark, for participating in this. And now I would like to hand over to the author, Mark Bernstein, to have a few words about the piece. Thanks.
Hi. Thanks so much, Dene. This is an exciting thing. I'll try to explain briefly why it's so exciting. One of the problems I'm having is that just a few seconds ago, the Skype audio feed became very difficult. And so there may be something wrong. Let me know if there's a problem with that. What I wanted to do when writing the Trojan Girls was to write an exciting hypertext. Hypertext that was full of plot. I wanted to do this partly because this simply wasn't what the early hypertexts we published starting in 1990 or so were chiefly interested in doing. Because they weren't interested in doing it, it became proverbial in some circles that hypertext couldn't do it. And this was used for some years, I think unfairly, to argue that hypertext itself was a postmodern figment. So that was the theoretical agenda here. I also wanted a hypertext in which you had something that felt like agency, interaction that was meaningful, without turning the reader into a hero protagonist. I have a long-running debate with the computer games fraternity on the utility of the player hero. And I wanted to actually take a hand in making a hypertext that would have things happening in which you would be an active participant, but in which you certainly weren't the protagonist. I toyed with writing fiction a bit for a number of years. Most of the early attempts justly ended up in a drawer. But I'd been waiting for years because the natural thing to do, since we were hypertext publishers, is to take my own work across the street, where I would have a sympathetic editor and where we wouldn't be editing our own work. To my surprise, there wasn't a across the street to go to when I felt that I had better do this if it was going to be done at all. That said, I haven't looked at Trojan girls for some time, partly because I can't bear to. It's true what they say about work never being finished, and it's true what they say about letting it go. I am working occasionally on another hypertext, this one a thriller, also plotful, working in a different vein. And this one is asking what has happened to the Bond girls like Pussy Galore, for example, and what they're doing today. So we'll talk more during the Q&A.
Thank you, Mark. So just quickly, I want to welcome you myself to this traversal. I'm Dene Grigar, as Claus has told you. You're probably wondering what a traversal is, what we mean by the word traversal. And this is a process that was developed by Stuart Moulthrop and me, and it's defined as, quote, an audio and video recording of a demonstration performed on a historically appropriate platform by an author and or reader of a work. Think of it as a kind of playthrough, like game playthrough that you might have watched on YouTube, except more academic. And I'm performing this work on the historical object is this MacBook Pro circa 2010. It's running High Sierra OS 10.13.6, and I'm using StorySpace 3, which is what the work is produced on. And this traversal, as you have seen, is live on YouTube, meaning there's folks that should come online and be chatting with us as you are here in this room, and I'm performing on YouTube. I want to thank Mark for this introduction, but I also want to thank Claus for inviting me to Hoff University. It's been a wonderful couple of days getting ready for the exhibit and making a lot of good decisions I think will be helpful for the Hypertext Conference. I would also like to thank Daniel for his labor in putting this wonderful, elegant solution to a problem of trying to get two people to work together, one on site, one at a distance, with a whole lot of folks that could be online. So thank you for that. I would like to thank also the Institute IISYS for making this evening possible, and for Mark for making this wonderful work available for me to perform. Thank you, Mark, for that. With no further ado, I'd like to talk about the work and do the traversal. So as I was mentioning to Mark earlier, I believe this work was first performed and debuted at ACM Hypertext that was held in Halifax in 2016. So it's about 2.5 years old. And those Trojan girls, I don't know how much literature you may know, but it is a mashup of Euripides and Seneca's play, The Trojan Women, and the Victorian school story. So if you're familiar with Harry Potter, and that whole thing about kids in a boarding school and the kinds of travails that they have to undergo fighting the evil Voldemort, well, there's a whole tradition of the school story that takes place in the Victorian age. And so this is a mashup of those two genres. This is the second work that Mark has produced for as hypertext fiction. The first one was called hypertext work. The first one was called The Election of 2012. It came out in 1988. And he actually debuted that work at the first Hypertext Conference in 1987. And he built that himself on a program that he had programmed called Hypergate. And so I have the copy of that in my library at the university. All the software that you need to read this work and access it comes on this flash drive. As you can see, it says Tinderbox on one side, and on the other side it says Those Trojan Girls. And all of the files are here. When Mark was first producing work for hypertext, starting in the late 80s to the present time, he first was producing them on 3.5-inch floppy disks. And then when the CD-ROM technology became more prevalent, he began publishing the works on CD-ROM. So this is the third platform that he's developed that I know of. There might have been 5.5-inch floppy disks, but I don't have any in my library. According to my research, there's about 45 titles that Mark has published through the years, maybe more. I've come across a few that he hasn't published, and I love looking at the ones that he's rejected. So this also, one more thing I want to mention is that when this was produced, it was set up to be read on Sierra, El Capitan, and Yosemite. And luckily, it runs also on Mojave, so it's got a nice long life with it, so that's great. So I'd like to move forward and show you and point out this interface. As I mentioned to you as you were sitting there or getting started, what you're looking at is the interface for the story itself. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you see a series of boxes. And on the right-hand side, you see what looks like a traditional textual environment with the name of the work, the name of the author, publication date, and then a quote. Sometimes you see this in a book. So story space narratives, if you think about it, is coming out of the tradition of traditional print writing, but with an incredibly interesting experimental focus, right? So a lot of us doing research in this area don't see it as an abrupt change of something that already existed, but actually a long line of experimentation that artists love to do when they come across some new tools or new mediums and things like that. And so what you're looking at here is more of a book environment, but with this wonderful new experimental way of reading a text. And as you can see, as I will show you, you're going to be able to read this work in a multitude of ways. I've counted 5, so Mark might correct me here. There might be more than that, but I've come across 5 different ways to read this text. The way I always prefer to work with hypertext work is through the boxes. It's through the lexia. So each of these little boxes contains information. The boxes are referred to as lexia, Lexia. And so I have been trained as a graduate student myself when I was in school to read it this way, not this way. So what I like about Story Space 3, Mark, to be honest with you, is the ability to see them so clearly side by side. This is lovely to see that. One other thing I'll mention to you is that when you buy this flash drive, you can actually read the work as just a reader, like it's a static environment. But you can also read it in the full Story Space software environment, which means I can move things around. I can actually move my lexis around and play with that a little bit. I can also make changes to the text and all kinds of other things. So I have more agency with this particular version of the work. Can you imagine if you've got a book, you can actually move the words around and erase things? That just doesn't happen, right? So what I'd like to start off with is the big box here, the red, which is what you're seeing here. The Trojan Women is just the introduction here. So Euripides wrote the Trojan Women in 415 BC. And it was revisited later by Seneca. So he talks about, the beginning of this tradition of the Trojan Women. Trojan Women tells the story of the fall of Troy. So if you're familiar with Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, you know that there was a 10-year war in Troy where the Greeks went to get Helen of Troy back from Paris, who had stolen her from her husband, the Greek general Menelaus. And so the war ensued for 10 years, and the Trojan Women story takes place just after the city has been burned. The men have been killed, the Trojan men have been killed, and the Greek soldiers have taken these high brow women, the queen, Hecuba, and her daughters, the princesses, and they're about to divide them and take them home as slaves and concubines. And so the women are together lamenting their life, what has happened to their husbands, to their lovers, to their world. And it's a story about tragedy and what happens to women in this tragic environment of a war, right? And so it's interesting to think about the correlation between the Trojan girls, those Trojan girls, the title, with this concept of the aftermath of war. So obviously the Trojan girls is going to be a story about some sort of battling in some sort of war environment. And sure enough, it is. So I'm going to click here, and you're going to see that I can click on this box, and I'm bringing up the preface. So now I've moved, and it says, previous English language accounts in the occupation and its end have paid too much attention to the exotic settings of Trojan. Sounds like Troy, right? Trojan. The storied nations of Troy. Hundreds of years ago, our chieftains, or a Daroka, played a very different role than they've played in the memory of anyone now living. While all patriots revere our uniquely beautiful landscapes and treasure our wildlife, these had little to do with the events of that terrible year. Right, so we have the setting. Because I'm writing in English, I've replaced our traditional titles and forms of address with the rough equivalents in European tradition. My classmate Linnea Senatera is not here, the great battle chief of fierce bowmen of the northern hardwood forest, as Professor Corveson chooses to render her courtesy title, but Lady Oakton. To us, Trojan was simply where we lived, the forest and the desert, the grand old houses, the beggars, and the colonial gallows were simply the world as it always had been. Now, what's interesting for me, and for you, I hope, is when you look at the words on the right-hand side of your text, you're going to notice a couple of things. First, there's some highlighted text here. Lady Oakland, to us, Trojan was simply where we lived, and the grand old houses. And so you can click on these hyperlinks, and it will take you to new text. And as I click on one of these, you'll notice some movement on this side. So there's a correlation between what I do here with what happens over here. Also, in many cases, the words themselves are hyperlinked without having a noticeable color attached to that hyperlink. So you can just put your cursor on a word, and many times that word is hyperlinked as well. But there's something special about the words that are highlighted in blue. I've noticed a phenomena that Mark has put into this text is that some of these blue hyperlinked phrases and words take you to new lexias, but some of them expand the text. So you stay on the same lexia, but you get more information. And this phenomena is called stretch text, right? So I'm going to click on one of these three because I'm just curious. And I'd like for you to tell me which one to click on. So I'm going to call on, tell me your name again? Johannes. Should I click on Lady Oakton, or to us, Trojan was simply where we lived, or grand old houses? Your choose. Grand old houses. So I'm going to click there. Takes me to a new lexia. Okay. This one is called Last Summer. And you can see that it says Polyxena. Polyxena is a takeoff of one of the characters in Trojan Women by Euripides and Seneca. It takes place at Brecon Junction last August, and it reads, Polly stares out the train window where the yellowing summer grasslands stretch for miles to end abruptly at the storybook peaks of the border. She's never seen such mountains. The land around her home in Edmonton is flat and forested, and of course Hill Academy takes its name from the paucity of other hills in the area. The train conductor interrupts her daydream. You're the gal headed for Brecon Junction. Yes, sir. Are we close? 5 minutes or so, miss. Might be good to gather your bags and whatnot. Is this a busy station? I've never been to this part of Trojan. The opposite of busy. We only stop if there's a passenger, and that's seldom more than once or twice a week. And he goes on and talks. And notice that down below, we have a blue hyperlink again. So we have one for Hill Academy and one down below after he says, oh, how nice. She watches the train leave. She was the only passenger bound for Brecon, apparently, and notices politely to the conductor, who's already immersed in a form that Polly glimpsed in his hand as he helped her off the train. Now, let me ask you, Dane? Friedrich. Which should I click on, Hill Academy or Bound for Brecon?
Hill Academy.
Okay. Takes us to Hill Academy. So now we're going to learn Hill Academy. Another really interesting phenomena with Story Space 3 that I like, you notice the lexias here, and you notice that we have an animation of the arrows pointing. So Hill Academy sits between they stop shooting, and with the arrows going in different directions. So this tells me that I can choose between one of those two paths. So reading a hypertext narrative means that you're reading in multiple pathways. If you've ever played Stanley Parable before, how many of you played any of the interactive games, Stanley Parable or any of those games? You know that there is many ways to navigate through the textual environment. That idea comes out of the notion of hypertextual narratives, right? And the kinds of thinking that took place in the late 80s and the early 90s. And that comes out of interactive fiction, which also comes out of choose your own adventure books. So there's a long history of this multiple pathways to think about, movement in the text. And so I want to pick between one of the two in just a second, but I'm going to read a little bit about Hill Academy. Hill Academy was and still is an old and notionally elite secondary school. It occupies an ancient and well-tended campus not far from Troy, which has been the provincial capital long before independence. The school was founded for the children of our former masters and was later open to the provincial elite they employ to maintain their profits. Graduates of Hill have included a collection of former prime ministers, leaders of industry, scientists and scholars and churchmen, and plenty of their wives as well. Quite a few of Bree's classmates are rich, or their parents are rich, and Linnea is not the only kid with a title. But Hill is a progressive school and has long welcomed students from the town and the farming communities, villages throughout the region, alongside its more traditional students. Before the occupation, Hill even enrolled a few foreign students from the East and a few more students of Eastern heritage. Now, I'd like to mention something about this. What other thing I think is worth mentioning is that the work, as I said earlier, is a mashup between this idea of Trojan women and the school story from the Victorian age. So now we're getting a little bit of that school story with the mentioning of Troy and those kinds of allusions. One thing I was talking to Claus about last night is that many of you, you all code, you all know how to program. And when you look at a web page or you look at some work that's got programming that's underneath the work, you're looking at the work and thinking about the programming underneath it. And you know how that work has come to life because you know how to program. People who don't know how to program are only seeing that top level. They're not understanding the depth that you understand, right? What I love about literature, and this particular one, is that literature functions in the same way. Underneath this textual front that you're seeing, this front end, is all these literary allusions that sit underneath and are driving the work. So even if you don't know those things, you can enjoy the front end. But if you understand Troy, if you understand the school story, if you understand Paradise Lost, which Mark cites at the very beginning in the preface, you start to get a really deeper sense of what the story means. It helps to understand the story at a different level. So it's worth mentioning these allusions as we move past through the story. Now, what's interesting is I can click on, I'm going to stay here for a second and I'm going to click on one of these words. Probably I should pick campus. So I click on campus. It's not highlighted, but I know that if I put my cursor there, it probably will go somewhere. And here it is. It takes me to a lexia called Last Summer. You see it here, and it's pointing down to unexpected summons. This last summer features Polyxena, West Close, and Last August. The train conductor interrupts Polly's daydream. You're the gal headed for Brecon Junction. Yes, sir, Polly answered. Are we close? 5 minutes or so, miss. Might be good to gather your bags and whatnot. Is this a busy station? I've never been to this part of Trojan. The opposite of busy. Now, I can continue reading this. I can click on another term here, another word on this, but I'm just going to use the return key, and that will take me straight to, or should take me straight to the lexia that the animation is pointing to. An unexpected summons. So there's another way to read the text. I've shown you 4 now, right? So the interesting thing about the work is that you get to choose how you want to read. You don't get that choice so much with the printed novel, right? So this Lexia says, Polyxena has never been before to Brecon, or indeed anywhere save her home at Edmundston, where she lives with her father, a country physician of modest accomplishment and still more modest means. Dr. Thomas Xena is a learned man, a great reader, and a genial storyteller, liked and respected by the folk around Edmundston. Now, I could continue reading that, but I love to jump around a text, and I also want to read as much as I can and show you more, so I'm not going to read a lot of any one text. I'm going to make us jump around a little bit. So I'm just going to jump here and pick another Lexia, and I'm going to let you choose for me. Tell me your name. Would you pick one for me? Which of these would you like to read?
Concept.
That is in the middle. Politics?
Concept is under Randolph.
Under Randall. I'm trying to find it. No.
That's
Right there? Yeah. Okay, comfy. The dinner table is vast, the silver on it impressive, and the grown-ups frightening. The Minister of Cultures, Mary's dad, sits at one end, though Lady Laplace has put Polly closer to her own end between Vernon Cornyn, Ava's big brother, famously expelled from Hill several years back, and Mason West. Polly's grateful for a familiar face. Everyone else is relaxed and jovial. They've all been here many times. They've known each other for years. They eat like this all the time. Polly is terrified when the bald old man across the table glares at her. I don't know you, young lady. Polly isn't quite sure what the polite response to this is supposed to be. If Miss Portman's deportment covered it, she's forgotten. She begins to sputter nonsense as Mary Laplace rescues her. So I'd like to click on Marlowe Randolph. Now, did you see what happened there? I clicked on that, and now we have the expanded text, or the stretch text. So instead of just my regrettable Uncle Marlowe Randolph, we get a paragraph underneath that gives more information about this. It says, Polly has been on her best behavior, stiff and cautious, but this is a marvel. Lord and Lady Laplace are important people, very important people, and probably her host, but Marlowe Randolph is history. Polly has read his whole chapters about his career in her modern history courses, not all of them complimentary, to be sure, but he's in the book. He was a clerk to the first Constitutional Convention. He once attended a conference with Gandhi. He had met Winston Churchill and Charlie Chaplin. Okay, so I'm going to actually now take us back. Now watch what I can do. I can come back here, to the top. There we go. And click back to the beginning. So I'm going to jump, and I want to get to a different area. So I want to go to Talking to Strangers. So now we're jumping to another character. This is Trish, farm girl Parker, and Linnea Semtier on March 14th in the afternoon at the Academy Lane. After practice, Trish and Linnea walk down to the tea shop to share a bun. The tea shop is neutral ground, neither campus side nor outside. Eating before dinner is discouraged but not precisely prohibited. In past years, Trish had regarded school rules and customs with a certain awe. When the other kids found clever ways to skirt and evade the strictures of the inscrutable masters, Trish turned her back. She's no snitch and no sneak, and I love the word snitch there because that reminds me of Harry Potter, right? The golden snitch. So there's some literary allusion there. Mark, I don't know if you put that there or not on purpose, but it's there for me. Farm Girl is safe as houses, but somehow she never joined the stream tunnel expeditions in the fall or the skinny dipping parties in the spring. When practical jokes were to be played on the staff, Trish was not to be found. Her reliability explains why she's living with the juniors assigned to Khmer, combined, of course, with the lack of status that comes with poverty. Okay, Claus, tell me, which should I pick, prohibited or poverty?
go for prohibited.
Okay. Stretch text. Friendships between classes are discouraged, too. Trish is a senior and Linnea is still a junior, and even though they're roommates in Kenmare, it wouldn't do to spend too much time together. So they're almost like asides, like the aside that you see in a play, in a Greek play or a Shakespearean play. All right, from here, I'm going to use the return key and see if that takes me somewhere. So from talking to strangers, I'm going to go to this grouping. Do you see that? So this is a grouping of lexias that starts with friends, poverty, Erica, house points, loneliness, Sue Gresham, definitely American, school class, the shot heard around the corner, inside tales, and hot lips. Okay? And I'm noticing a little bit of an animation between loneliness and Sue Gresham. Let me see if I can show you that more clearly by moving the text around. There we go. See that? You can see it a little bit more clearly. I'm going to pick definitely American. Since I'm an American, let's go for it. Well, when they were well settled with tea and buns, Sue Gresham explains that she's writing a story about the academy. It must be very exciting for you, she asked, inclining her head towards Linnea. Oh, yes, Miss Gresham, of course, it's lots more exciting than being cooped up at home. And what about you, Miss Parker? Is it still exciting? Chris isn't sure what the writer wants. She shrugs. Exciting enough, I suppose. There's always plenty of work to do, that's for sure. I'm not certain that excitement is really what one wants just now anyway. And the word excitement brings me back to Mark's comments that what he was trying to instill in this hypertext is a sense of excitement. And I do want to remark about something that he said. There was a theorist whose name is Janet Murray, who wrote a really famous book in 1997, published in 1997, called Hamlet on the Holodeck. And in it, she critiques interactive work, particularly hypertext. And she came down pretty hard on hypertext fiction in a way that many of us were very, unhappy about, because we saw the future of hypertext as the future for storytelling. It still is a future for storytelling if you think about it, because even if you don't see the web as a hypertextual environment in its pure form, the notion of hyperlinks is something that is hypertextual. Everything we do now requires a link, right? And it's become so ubiquitous that you don't even know that you're hyperlinking anymore, that you're going from place to place to place. And so, many of us look back 22 years later after that book has been published and say, no, she was not right. She was wrong about that. But at the time when she wrote that book, it was discouraging to a lot of people working in the field. And so, especially those that were working in hypertext. She was particularly very vicious about hypertext. So, but anyway, so there is this, but I want to mention that there's this idea of excitement in this work because there's a lot of different plots. And if you think about it, the notion of literature has been stamped with this idea of unity. Aristotle writes in the Poetics that you should have the unity of time, place, and action. And that idea was informed Shakespeare in Shakespeare's plays. So unity of time. So you don't want something to go too long. You want to be able to sit down, and in that time frame you're reading this, it takes place during that time frame. That's perfect unity of time. You don't have a lot of spaces. So if you watch a spy movie on television, and it jumps from Istanbul to Vienna to Hof, somewhere, it's jumping around, that's not unity of time, right? Unity of time means it happens in one place. But unity of plot means one single plot. And if you're going to have subplots, they're called subplots. They're not main plots. So to create something that has many major plots runs counter to traditional literary, storytelling, right? And so but you can maintain that in a hypertext environment, which is what Mark is doing with this work. Now, I'm going to go back here to this. I'm going to click on the word exciting just to, emphasize the word exciting. And there goes to school class. It jumps up here. So why ever not? I'm just a charity case. No style, no family, no money. What does that matter nowadays? I think it matters more now than ever, actually. But they're opening up the country to new men, new ideas, new principles, the new democracy. Yes, Trish looks around, but aside from the three of them and the baker, the shop is empty. Somehow I think it's made people think maybe made them fall back a bit. I'm sorry, I'm not saying this well. I haven't thought it through, but somehow old families and old money seem to matter more now than they did before. I want to click on the word money. All right, so I'm going to click here. Comes to fireside, tells you can see we're working around this grouping of lexias. This stranger could be anyone. She could be working for security. Trish can't think of a decent lie, so she goes with the most innocuous true gossip she can think of. Oh, Linnea's being shy. The buzz right now is all about the two scullery maids in love. It's really adorable. One is new and the other one's very new, and I think nobody has any idea. It's all we talk about. Oh, I can imagine. Now, I'm going to hit the return key, and it's taking me to the shot heard around the corner. And this is another illusion that comes from American culture. A shot heard around the world. A shot, Linnea says, sounds like a hunting rifle. How would you know? Do you hear people getting shot all the time? I'm a farm girl, Trish reminds them. Guns are for keeping the coyotes away from the sheep. I'm okay with that, which is a good thing because my dad is hopeless. Another example why family and fortune aren't always the bee's knees. They made me learn to shoot a pistol when I turned 9, but I don't think I've touched mine since. Why do you think that was, Trish wonders? Who do you think that was, Trish wonders? Sue Gresham. Well, I know, Sue Gresham, a writer? A writer who attended Martland. Linnea ponders for a moment. Though I wouldn't rely on that necessarily. There's something just a little bit off somewhere. It's not that her manners were bad. Well, it's only Marlton, Trish chides, exaggerating the reporter's accent. What can you expect? But yes, you're right. There was a fairly peculiar cup of tea. All right, I want to go back now to the top. I can go back up here, click, and I'm going to jump around. I'm going to show you how large this work is. Right now we have it expanded so you can see it from the back of the room. I can bring it down a little bit, but still you can see that there's a lot of text here. We can't read this in one sitting, right? This is going to take some time. So I'd like to jump over and maybe read something over here, Development Office. Okay? So the Development Office, it's getting quite late on that terrible first afternoon when Major Schrecker and the rest of his company from the security return. They don't take the walk this time. They stay on the edge of campus close to the woods on the far side of Jefferson and the science building. They're slow and they're careful and they're not being very cautious. And this time nothing happens. But the only light in the administrative wing comes from a room with the glass door marked admissions. Schrecker, one arm in a sling, shoves open the door. He is not happy. Inside, a smiling man waits at a desk where he's working at a laptop. My name is Bernstein. Sounds like Mark Bernstein, doesn't it? How may I help you? He asked, as if he had expected the interruption, as if the company of unhappy security, a company depleted of casualties inflicted by supposed schoolchildren, is simply another administrative chore for the competent staff of the academy to tidy up. You can begin, Bernstein, by explaining that what the hell's going on here. You have me at a loss, Major. Schrecker, 3rd Division. Yes, but I don't know what the hell is going on either. 5 of my men were wounded and 2 killed by terrorist action right here on the lawn. So now we're getting to part of the plot where we see the violence, right? The fighting, which is intimated in the notion of the story of the Trojan women, right? And the Trojan girls. So I'm going to click on the return key and go to closure. This small lexia here. Notice that if I click here, it goes back and forth. This tells me that it leads somewhere that we're going to go back. Major Schrecker is impatient, he's irritated, and his left shoulder is beginning to hurt again. This cheerful idiot in the administrative office is not helping. What are you people playing at, he demands. What the hell happened here? This is a school, not a battleground. I can't tell you, Major, because I don't know. Something happened. We do know that. We know a lot, in fact, because we've seen and heard some of it. And we can guess at other parts, but you want to know why. But I simply do not know. This is not my story. But you are in charge, Bernstein. Yes, I know. Dr. Sprague is acting headmistress, but you are in charge of development. You see, I've been a student too in my time, and as you are responsible for development, you secure the funds and the resources to make everything that happens here possible, including the needless, pointless sacrifice of 2 fine young men this very afternoon. I never gave commandment for their deaths. Who did? The reader, I suppose. The reader, and this supposed reader, this despicable construct of yours, is also responsible for Miss Centier's unfortunate mishap. Though I doubt that the reader actually intended harm to befall her ladyship, barring an inexplicable jealousy of Trish Parker, say, an irrational hostility to adolescent infatuations. Otherwise, I believe the girl was popular and well-liked by all. Your reader is a convenient excuse, since you claim you cannot know what the reader has chosen or will choose. So in this sense, Bernstein, the author, has brought you into the text. You're responsible for killing the character. Now, you don't know anything about this character. You don't know how this character died. You don't know anything about it, but now you're sucked in to the action, right? You caused the problem. Now, we're going to have to find, if we keep reading through this text, we may get to that lexia that tells you what you did. But probably not, because I'm going to take us back to the beginning. We're going to jump around some more. I want to go to Night Watch. May Elster, Hill Academy, Star Room, May 1, night. Amy's gone off to the science building, taking Bree, taking Jacob's whole team, and taking May Esther's confidence. May has got her people, and Sophia's people too, and she's responsible. May understands management. She's been in charge of the family store plenty of times, but she always has known what to do, what might happen, and who to call if something comes up. This time, there's no one to call, and anything might happen. Sophia comes over, and the word Sophia is interesting here because it's the Greek word for wisdom, right? Sophia. Sophia comes over, the new girl, the unknown. That's bad. This has been drummed into her for years, the importance of knowing your crew, of choosing people you can rely on. Who knows who Sophia is, really? Then again, May knows that to most of her classmates, kids she's known for years, she's still almost as much as an outsider as the Egyptian. Now, we have here a derogatory use of the term Egyptian, right? So we're going to see the biases in this childhood story, in the school story. Sure, she's got money, but she works. Her parents work. They work for money, not for the government or for science or for art. So there's a hierarchy here of those who do pure labor for science and art and these kinds of things, and people who make money, right? Bad thing. And of course, May and Sophia each have that tent that marks their Eastern ancestry. May's people had been merchants and aldermen in Hill for a century or more, but they'll always be foreign. God knows what Sophia Families does or how much of it the police know about it. I'd like to click on the word foreign. I'm going to start wrapping this up because we're coming to almost 7:15-ish, and I want to have time for Q&A. When I click on foreign, it takes me to this grouping here. Managing, waiting, don't look at me, model student doing the job, when we were 6, whistling in the dark, and afterthought. Now, if I'm not going to read through these, I'm going to show you the structure. I'm going to tap on the managing, on the return key for managing. It's going to take us to waiting. Do you see that? Now, here I'm going to hit the key again. Takes me to don't look at me. Now, at this juncture, I have a choice between model student or doing the job, right? So I'm going to hit the return key again, and it bypasses model student. It's taking me to doing the job. Notice that I'm not going to read model student if I do that. I miss that piece of information forever if I don't go back. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going back, right? And I like not knowing. So how'd you get to be in the newspaper? A couple of days ago, being in the newspaper would have been something. Now, Lania's going to be in the paper for sure. Farm girl, if they know, looks like I started a trend. No, I'm serious. Did you mean it for that to happen? Well, I was thinking more like the picture would be for a cute little art gallery in Soho, actually. The stuff the photographer showed me looked great, his portfolio or whatever. The newspaper photograph wasn't so great. No, but it's a newspaper, and he does that. Photographs are technically flawed, but still have something to look at. Your bod. maybe some of the others were better. So why did you do it? I don't know exactly. My mom would think, end of the world. So would the school, in much more sophisticated, nuanced way, of course, but it's not. It's an image of a girl in motion in spring. I figured instead of this endless, slow wrangle with my folks and you guys and the school, it might be a way to say, I'm me. Take it or leave it. That I can understand. Besides, some of the pictures he'd done were amazing. So now I'm going to hit return, and we get to doing the job. When we were 6, whistling in the dark, an afterthought. See, so that's how I worked around that text. I'm going to hit on return again, and it takes me back to the main interface. So I probably should wrap up the reading. Am I bad out of time, perhaps? Yeah, and so, but you can see that this work requires, like a novel, you wouldn't sit down and read Harry Potter, well, I did, in one night, right? But you generally don't read a novel in one sitting. Usually you read a chapter or two and you sit it down, and you go do something, you pick it up later, read another chapter. Hypertext insinuates the same kind of behavior. You need to take time, you need to read it, piece by piece. And so we can't do one particular reading on one particular night like this. But I hope I at least made you interested in a little bit about the structure and the way in which hypertext lends itself for storytelling. So I'll end my talk here. Thank you for coming tonight. So we're going to open this up now for Q&A, and Mark is here with us. And I'd love to have questions first asked from Mark. Mark, thank you for letting me read that. This is the fourth time I've read it, and I don't think I've hit on but one lexia twice in your work. So that's how big it is. The 4 times I've read it, I've hit repeated one lexia. So, you would like to make some comments or ask questions of Mark? Yes, Klaus?
I have to say that I'm the first one asking questions. I have 2 questions. The first one is a short one. So we have seen some notes on the map with different
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm having a little trouble again with sound.
Okay. So we have seen some notes on the map that have different colors. So there were some notes with dark color and there were some light notes. So is there any different semantics on those notes?
I believe the dark notes are sculptural hypertext notes that are linked through a different mechanism.
Could you briefly explain this mechanism to people watching us?
Okay. Traditionally, hypertext work by explicitly linking notes or pages or lexia. People call them different things, but they're explicitly linked one to another. In HTML, we have a explicit connection with an angle bracket A tag. Another way to think about this I came up with in a 2001 paper is to assume that everything is linked to everything else, and then take away the links that you don't want. I called that sculptural hypertext. Now, in a text with thousands of notes, you can't have everything linked to everything else, but episodically this works rather nicely, especially for dialogue. It turns out that lots of dialogue really doesn't require a great deal of explicit ordering. You just need some rules for turn taking so that everyone gets a chance to talk. And I believe that most of the colored notes are related to that. And it's mostly meant just for my use in keeping track of what is linked through an alternate mechanism and what's sitting around waiting to be linked or otherwise would be inaccessible.
I have a very quick second question. Sorry. We have seen what stretch text is on the text side, basically. Could you imagine something like stretch text on the image side as well? So meaning you activate a specific node and suddenly some other nodes appear.
I mean, there are lots of ways to think about this. There's scratch text with action at a distance, where you click on this link and some other part of the text expands. There's a trick Judd Morrissey used in a hypertext called The Jew's Daughter, where you click on a link and the text of the link stays the same, but everything around it changes. So it doesn't expand. It's replacement too, but it's only a partial replacement. I didn't use stretch text as much as I probably ought to have in retrospect in those Trojan girls. Stretch text has its own problems for narrative because it's the text stays in place, and in narrative we need to go places and do things. But I'd like to work more in stretch text and something in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful feature. It plays out really well in works like Pry. You might have seen Samantha Gorman and Danny Canizano's Pry. Yeah. And this work, not to stretch the text, you use your fingers on the iPad, and you open up the eye of the character, and then the words open up with it. So you're prying his eyes open to see something that he is thinking. So it's a real interesting use of it there. And so I like it here too. I think it comes in handy for making asides and adding extra information and getting people to, read more deeply. Right? Other questions? May I ask you a question? This might help you a little bit. Ask me a question. So, how many of you have seen a hypertext work before like this? Anybody? How many of you read a work of like a literary game? How many of you read literature as in a game environment or read literature as an interactive environment? Anybody? So this is the first experience you've had with interactive literature? Okay. What's your response to that? What can you say about watching this unfold? Yes, please.
I pretty much enjoy it again because it offers me to have a story and experience it over and over again. Like I've played a text-based story game once again a few years ago, yet it was way less sophisticated than this work. I mean, I've heard it has over 1,000 nodes, you said, which is incredible because you can, even with the stretch text, you can see, okay, what is my point of attention right now, and can expand that, read more about it, and fit it to your needs in that moment. You can either say, okay, I want to go for a rush, I don't want to know explicitly every little detail, or I can really go into it. And this is what I think makes it really enjoyable for the reader.
Thank you. Someone else have a maybe comment? Figure? Did you want to say something?
No.
No. Claus, did you? Yes.
I kind of, because you have mentioned these interactive games, you just said interactive text-based games. I also remember the multi-user dungeons, which I was playing when I was a student. And in those games, basically, you also can pick the path. Now, this multi-user dungeon is a game. This is not a game. It says on its scale. So it would be interesting actually to ask the question, where's the difference between a game, which also has some hypertextual elements in it, and hypertext fiction?
Mark, you want to tackle that one? Because I have my own opinion about that.
Okay. In games, there are usually winners and sometimes losers. And in games, you are trying to achieve a goal, often a fairly artificial goal, like moving the ball into a particular net or running around bases or something like that. But you are doing something to optimize an outcome for yourself or for some fictive construct that you identify with. That's not really what literature does. You identify with people in literature, but it's a different thing. In a variety of narrativist games, literary games have been attacking the boundaries since really Dungeons and Dragons in 1976, something like that. But I find the interface a difficult place to work, both for reasons of craft and for reasons of conviction. There's a strong torque in games to address the player, and second person present is a really hard voice to write in. I'm not, as you see, a particularly accomplished lyrical writer, and so trying to tackle something as hard as second person present seemed like a foolish step to take.
Now, I want to add that literary games are an interesting phenomenon because there are games that have a literature element or literature that has a gameful element. So we call those literary games. And Astrid Ensign writes about this in her book called Literary Gaming. But Stanley Parables is an example of that. You think of that as a literary game. Narrative, story, and it works you through a series of pathways and 19 different endings. So it's very gameful. You get locked in the. If you follow the unreliable narrator will tell you what to do. If you follow what he says, he'll get you locked in a closet, and you have to figure out how to get out of it. He'll make you jump out of a window and kill yourself. I mean, so you have to understand when to pay attention to him and when not to pay attention to him. It becomes a very gameful environment. So that's one example. Another one that I think is worth looking at is Her Story. Fabulous narrative of video clips. It's a murder mystery that you have to follow, and you're reading these clips piece by piece. In a way, it's a hypertextual environment too, and it has one ending, but there's two particular outcomes to that ending. So a lot of interesting things that have come about. The first game I ever played was Pong. There's nothing literary about Pong, a ball going back and forth, right? But as games developed, Colossus and all of the Colossus Cave and all of that, there was something literary about them, right? You had to become, in fact, the better games were written by better writers. So Nick Moffat is one of my favorite interactive fiction writers. Thanks for that question. Anything else? Anybody else have a question? What about performance? What about performing this kind of work? Did it make you, did hearing the work perform, is that a different experience than you having to read it? And if so, was that a positive experience for you? When have you ever been to an event where you heard literature read, a poetry reading or a literary reading of any sort? Have you been to anything like that before? So this is the first for most of you then. So how was that compared to sitting and reading a book? Did that get your attention? Yes, sir.
Yes, it really did get my attention. And the thing is, the main difference is when I'm sitting there, reading in silence, pictures in my head, all those visions are popping up. But there's some extra to it when you're presenting and reading it to us, because you're modulating your voice, you're intonating stuff differently, which is more appealing to me as I'm more able to dive into the idea of that text.
Yeah, and I think this happened also through the years. There's three types of reading that Catherine Hales has pointed out, and one of them is reading really fast and reading very quickly, right? The kind of browsing words, which we do a lot in graduate school. We read very quickly a lot of text because we have to, and we get adept at that. And then we also get adept at deep reading. And so learning to do which one of those two types of reading for the appropriate text and situation is something you have to learn, right? But what's interesting is, as most of the people that I know that are not in graduate school or not college educated, they're not necessarily learning how to read in multiple ways. They may do it, but they're not aware of it. And I think it's interesting to think about what it takes to take in information. So just to put it in perspective, sound is the only sensory modality that's hardwired in our brains. I said this last night in our discussion over dinner. All the other senses that you have are mediated through some experience, some phenomena in your body. So for example, vision. Right now you're looking at me. But what happens when you're looking at me, you don't realize that your eyes see me. When you see me originally, I'm upside down and I'm a flat image. And what happens is the brain puts me right side up and puts color and depth and shadows. Now, you don't realize there's a lag time. It's not like watching a lag time on YouTube, but there is a lag time. It also means that it's not immediate, right? Sound is straight in. Nothing mediates that. So sound is really the most provocative way to get information. So audiobooks are very popular, and people don't know why they're popular, but that's one of the reasons why they're popular. So you're hearing the words acted out, as you said, but also if you've got headphones on, I mean, talk about really hardwired in your brain, right? It's right there in your ears. There's no other acousmatic sounds that are coming to you. It's right there. And so it's really one of the most effective ways to get information. And yet, it's the least possible way that most of us read, right? And study. Yes?
Do we have time for one?
Yes, I think so.
That's one thing I've noticed. You have shown us different ways of reading this piece. So, for example, you could follow the links, and links are being presented on this map as well as arrows. Mm-hmm. So now the map also has a 2D space, right? It's presented or projected on a 2D space. That means the space itself and the location of different bits and pieces also could be interpreted by the reader. So objects which are close to each other could be interpreted as something very close, semantically close. Mm-hmm. So now, Dene, you have moved in the very beginning to demonstrate that you can move things around. You have demonstrated this. So if you move nodes like that, do you change the story? I mean, do you change the intention of Mark?
Well, a couple of things. First, I haven't done this with this hypertext, but in the early hypertext story space 1 and 2, if you moved a text around and you printed out your hypertext, which you could do, wherever the printer would read this, as the top lexia would get printed first, then the second one, then the third one, it would do like this. So essentially, it does change the way in which you read the text, right? So you could do that. And I'm looking at this and I'm noticing that right now, these arrows that look like they're fixed, but this is an open hypertext. I can probably change this pathway if I want to, right, Mark? I haven't done this yet, but I'm assuming I can change the pathway.
You need to switch into edit mode to actually do that, but yes, you could.
Like right here. So now I'm in edit mode. And I could invariably do exactly what you suggested, and that's make changes to this and re-author the text. Right, Mark? So here's the deck.
Whoops. One thing to think about is that when you're choosing links, even when they're explicitly in the text, you are actually making an inscription in the text. You're choosing what to read, what not to read. You're erasing what you don't read, path not taken. Yes, this is contrary to my intention, but if it weren't my intention to make it possible for you to defy that intention, then I wouldn't have written it this way.
Okay, thank you.
And intention's a very dubious concept, even in connection with conventional books. Intention is low repute.
I'm noticing
Writers
also, Mark, I have a question for you. One of the things I couldn't find in any documentation is setting up camp, these bubbles. Like I move them around, but there's no text inside of them. It says to be done. To be done. Are these texts that you were thinking of making and just put them there as ideas?
I believe that's true. There are a number of leftover notes to myself that are unlinked and inaccessible, but still visible in the map.
You know what I like about that, Mark? That's like marginalia. That's like you leaving a bit of a piece there for the reader to say, oh, Mark was going to write something called Love in the Ruins. What the hell was that, Mark? Tell me about Love in the Ruins. What were you intending there? So now I'm teased into wanting to know the answer to that question.
In which section is Love in the Ruins?
It's in Camp Hill.
Camp Hill.
Yeah.
Oh, that's actually not a to-do. That's a thematic marker. It was originally a to-do, but it's a marker for the general theme of what's going on there.
Yeah, so you have, if you use the full version of Story Space, you can do some reauthoring of the work, which I think is kind of funny because you can't reauthor a book, right? You can't take a print book and reauthor it unless you have a pair of scissors and a pen and mar the book. So that might be it, unless there's, yes, sir. Good, thank you.
I just have a question concerning technical things. I hope this doesn't sound too stupid to you, but that we have this story with those different branches and approaches. Is it actually possible to because I thought when our characters, like I know in film theory this is called breaking the fourth wall,
Yes.
like speaking with us as the reader. Like, is it actually possible that the reader makes decisions, like this is decision based, like what do I want to read right now, and taking into concern those decisions, like altering the outcome of my story? Is it actually possible to do this?
I would say if you're using the full version and you're in editing mode, you could, right?
Just the ending.
Yeah. I deliberately avoided sections that were explicitly diegetic. Do you hit the dwarf with the axe or do you run away? But in fact, there are lots of ways where you affect what happens. One of the important things, possibly, again, not my intention, is that there's a critical scene that we didn't get close to in this reading, fairly early in the text in most readings, in which one of those Trojan girls is taken out and shot, but she's shot off stage. In fact, she's the head girl of the senior class. And so we don't actually see, depending on what you read, that small uncertainty of not seeing may or may not be resolved. This has profound consequences, of course, for the girl, but also for everyone else.
In Michael Joyce's Afternoon of Story, which Mark published in 1989, there's a little lexia that you read that you get to about the 6th or 7th lexia that says, I think I saw my wife and son get killed this morning, die this morning. And so you're reading along, and if you're trying to skip around and you don't ever get to that lexia, you don't know what the angst is all about. It's a very heavy, dark, this piece is very full of angst, and you don't quite know why he's upset until you find that lexia. Then you say, oh yeah, that makes sense. So in the early days, artists would put in these things called guardrails that had forced the reader to get to the lexia. You have a much more open system, I think, with this one, because I was able to bypass that in 3 or 4 different readings. Whereas some of the early hypertext, you would have been forced to see that particular lexia. I think about something else you were saying about that. Your question again was about, say your question one more time.
Technical aspects of altering the story itself or altering the outcome, like the ending.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this is that the notion of hypertext fiction, there's an early ideas that hypertext fiction were open systems, but they're not. They're really a lot of ways to navigate through a work within a closed system. And there's not been a lot of hypertexts that have been open systems. And I was talking last night to Claus about one called Disappearing Rain by Dina Larson, which is a lovely piece. But the open system that it is, she had links to things outside of her work, but those links all died. They're all dead links. So now the work makes no sense because you get to this external link to take you out of the story and there's nothing there and you can't get back. So there's something of a failure in moving outside of the text unless you build some sort of system where you can keep expanding your universe, but even that means it's not an open system. It just means it's a bigger universe. Yes, sir.
I understand there's no perfect or default way through your book. So that means, can we get information that you want us to know? Is there a default way?
We can default through the return, right, Mark? We can do the wave of return because I did pretty successfully get to, let's go back here.
Yeah, there are notes with no default link, but certainly you can use default links quite extensively. And that will generate a path through the text.
Yeah. There's some hypertext like We Descend by Bill Bly. You can read the whole thing by hitting the return key. And it was Michael Joyce, I believe, made up the term the waves of return. The idea that you could just keep hitting the return key and you're just kind of swimming through the text. So the wave of return. But a lot of hypertexts were meant not to do that. They don't want you just to do that because that's a linear reading, right? The whole point of this is to make you have to reconstruct the story in your mind. Well, I know what I was going to mention, the notion about these open texts and the fourth wall. So if you think about it, there's in traditional literature, like if you're reading a book, there's the time of the telling. So you're reading like Trojan Women. It takes place at the fall of Troy, the time of the telling. And then there's the time that the story was written. So it was written by Euripides. The play was written by Euripides in 415 BC, so 2 times of telling. In interactive work like this, hypertext or interactive media, there's a third way of telling a story, right? Third time, and that is the time of the intervention. So I intervene today in this text, and I'm making things happen. I'm changing the way the text is being read. And that is a different way of thinking about textuality in the reading experience. That idea of the 3 types of time comes to us from Espen Aarseth, a fabulous Norwegian theorist who wrote a book called Cybertext and published that in 1997, very famous work. And I would say that really does open up a new way to engage with a piece of work. I want to thank you guys for coming. I know it's nighttime and you probably could be eating dinner right now, but thanks for your time. And Mark, thank you for joining us, and it's good to see you again. I'll see you next September, eh?
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure.
That was fun. Thank you, Klaus.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I get a
Thanks.
Thank you. I get a hug, Mark. I could.
Next
Virtual
September.
hug. Okay. Good question. Thank you for those. This is the 18th traversal I've done. I'm trying to go through all the early works, especially those that are on the floppy disks in my library because you can't read them anymore, right? And they're going to the floppy disks. I have 61 Macintoshes in my lab, so I can read all of them. But at some point, the floppies are going to die,
Yeah.
right? So I'm trying to perform these works before they're gone, before they die. And I've done 18 of them now. I don't consider this one of those. This is separate because this is new. But the early ones in floppy disks and CD-ROMs are particularly scary to lose. Mm-hmm. All right.
Yes, yeah.
Bye, Mark. I'm going to close up shop here.
Mark, do you join us for dinner?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye. Hi Mark. Auch schon das Thema. Vogelfrei. Wirklich frei.